If you recall, I'll speak slowly. Yesterday's daf, actually last couple dafim, have dealt with the, I would say, interfaith relations, what we call it today, which were not used in their context the same way we use them, right? So basically connections between Israel and their dominant culture around them, which in the Gemara's case was Roman culture, but we of course refer to many others. And our Gemara, our Mishnah, and our Parak is referring to prohibitions and restrictions on interactions with the Ovdei Kochavim, who they lived among. We'll see at the end of the daf today, we'll repeat what we said earlier from Shmuel, which is that a lot of this does not apply in Bavel, which is interesting, because either for, Ava reasons, you can't really be too distant from the non-Jews. They will realize and they will come to hate you, or because of commerce business, if you don't work with the non-Jews, who are you going to deal with? Or there's another opinion that the Jews, not the Jews, the Goyim outside of Eretz Yisrael do not really worship their idols wholeheartedly. They sort of just do it out of rote, so that doesn't really matter. They're not really Ovdei Avodah Kochavim. All of these, of course, are problematic because the question of how to apply them becomes very complex in a changing world. But that is the topic of our Gemara. But today, top line of
Well,
Daf Yomi.
one other issue that they don't talk a lot about is that the Persians ruled Babel for most of this period, and they didn't have statues that people. They had some other strange practices, but they didn't have statues that people bowed down to the way the Romans did, and the Greeks also did.
Okay, I'm gonna rely on you for a lot of this information because I don't have it. We're going to discuss the Persians a little bit today, but it is correct that there's different ways of worship, which of course comes into the whole discussion about Islam and Christianity and other things. But this is very complex. Well, let's start today's daf from the top of daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Onkelos bar Clonimis. There was a man named Onkelos. Some understand this is our famous Onkelos Ager. Others say maybe it was a common name in Rome, and there were many people named Onkelos or several. But Onkelos bar Clonimis, who was Clonimus was a Roman general or something or leader. He was Igayer. He converted to Judaism, and of course, this was incredibly common, right, at the end of the Roman Empire or the end of the Jewish Empire, I guess, that people were converting. Because there were Jews. There were large bands of people who wanted to be part of Judaism, which ultimately became Christianity too. But he was converted, and the Caesar was not happy about this. So Shadar Caesar Gunda de Romai Abatre, the Caesar, who was his relative, I think his uncle, I forgot where we say that, sent a gedud, a troop, a platoon of soldiers to go and collect him and bring him back home and teach him the right way. So Mashchinu Bikrai, he basically drew them out in psukim, meaning he started teaching to them. He taught them about the Torah, and ultimately Igayer, they all became converts. So he became a proselytizer essentially to the people who came from Rome. Okay, so then the Caesar was not happy about that. So Hadar Shadar Gunda Dromaya Achrina. So he sent the next troop of Romans and Abatre to pick up Onkelos. Amarlu, and the Caesar gave them directions, lo temru le velo midi. Do not go into any theological debates with this guy. He's dangerous. He knows his stuff. He'll convince you. Don't talk to him. So Kiavi Shaklo v'azlo, when they picked him up and they brought him on the way to Rome, Amalu, he said to them, don't worry, I'm not going to tell you anything about our religion, but Emelachu milta ba'alma. Let me just tell you, or I guess the Gersh is probably Emelachu milta. Let me tell you something in general, meaning I'm not going to tell you religion. I don't want you to open a Tanakh right now, but let me just give you a general parable. Ba'alma, in the world, meaning in normal behavior, nifyura nakit nura kame pifura. Right? Rashi says these are all titles of Roman, what do you call them? Nobility, right? So different levels, and Charlie might know what they all are, but nifyura, and they're lower styles.
Just some Steinsaltz.
What?
Steinsaltz says, "Whoops, I just lost it. Hold on."
Okay, so
Steinsaltz says, "Nifura is a temple or ministerial guard. Pifura is a keeper, custodian of the palace. Ducasta is a leader or commander, and Kama is a ruler like a king's, like a courtier of the king."
okay, so there we go. So they're all levels of Roman nobility, but the way it is, we're 6 lines from the top, Miriam. The Nifura is nakat nura kami pifura. The lower official carries a lamp in front of the higher official, and then on and on. The pifura carries in front of the duksa, and the duksa carries in front of the hagmona, and the hagmona in front of the kuma. Right? The kuma was some court authority, as Charlie just said, but kuma minakat nura mikame. Mikami Inche, does the Kuma hold a lamp in front of people? Meaning you have a strict hierarchy in the Roman leadership and in most places where you don't belittle yourself or take care of people below you. But look at God, right? Sorry, the first question was, does the Kuma carry a lamp in front of other people? Amr Leilo. They said, of course not. No Kuma would be caught dead carrying a lamp for regular people. Amarlo, he said to him, so Uncle said to these Roman guards, Hakadosh Baruch Hu Nakat Nur Kami Yisrael. Look at God. God has no limitation and holdups about this. God is holding a lamp in front of His people. Kol Yisrael Shdichtiv, as the pasuk says, Hashem holech lifnehem yomam lamud eish laila. Right, Hashem goes in front of them with the cloud and the fire at night. So God is cares so much about the people. God is not divorced from the people. God is close to the people. You can imagine the conversation continued, and ultimately, Igayer Kulo, they also all converted. So now the second troop of guards has converted. So finally, the case Caesar said, this is getting ridiculous. Hadar Shadar Gudna Achrina Abatre. The Caesar sent a third troop of troops to pick up Uncleus Hager, right, who converted against sort of the Caesar's wishes. Amarlo, and he said to this third group, don't talk to him at all. Forget about common language. Don't do philosophical or theological discussions. Don't even have a chat with them about baseball. Lo tishtoi midi bahadei. Don't talk to him at all. So, okay, so they came, these closed-mouthed guards. Hinaktilo, they picked him up, va'azli, and on the way out, chaza mizuzata demancha pitra. Uncleus had a mezuzah on the door of his house. So Otiv Yadeh, he put his hand and touched the mezuzah. Of course, this is where a very strong tradition to touch the mezuzah. There's no kissing involved in this part. He just touched the mezuzah. Amr Luhu, no, it's a little strange, but he said to the guards, "My high, do you know what this is?" Amr Leh, they said, "No, you tell us, right? Imalana, tell us what the mezuzah is." Amarlu, he said to him, "Look, you know what the mezuzah is? Min hagosh shel olam, the normal way of the world. Melech basar v'dam yoshev mi bifnim." Right? Normal kings or Caesars or kings, they sit inside the palace in the most innermost area. V'avadav mishamrino tami b'chutz. And the servants and the layers of security protect them from outside. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, avadav mi bifnim, Hashem, it's the opposite. The servants, meaning humans, are inside the house. V'hu mi b'chutz, and God is on mishamra mi b'chutz. God is watching them from the outside. That's what the mezuzah symbolizes. Shenemar Hashem yishmar tzitcho v'oecha me'atav yad olam. So again, it led them to a discussion about how God cares about the Jewish people and Hashem's connection to Am Yisrael. Igayer, and the third group also converted. And finally, the Caesar said, okay, I'd better save my troops. Tu lo shagar batre, he didn't send anyone after Uncleus anymore. So this is the famous story of Uncleus Hager. Now, getting back to, because we mentioned yesterday Antoninus and Rebbe, we darshan a medrash that's very famous to many people, of course, in Rashi quotes in the Chumash. It says in the beginning of when Rivka is walking around with this pregnancy, Vayomer Hashem la, Hashem said to her, Shnei goyim bivitznech, you have two, which really translates as nations. But Amar Yehuda Amar Rav, I'll agree, goyim ele geyim. You have two geyim. Geyim are very holy, very prominent people, right? You have two geyim inside of you. Ze Antoninus v'Rebbe, right? It's referring to Antoninus from Esav, from Rome, and Rebbe from Yaakov, from Yisrael. They were so fancy and wealthy and popular. They had a full smorgasbord on their table in the winter and the summer. Of course, back in those days, there was much less food around in the winter, right? So they had complete food. They had chazeret. They always had salad and kishut and snon. I don't know how to translate all these words, but different kind of vegetables and rare things all the time. Damarmar, as the famous saying goes, the first wide line, snon, it's good to eat snon. Snon like radish, I think, right? Is mechatech ochel. It cuts your food, meaning it helps you digest food very well. Chazeret, eating lettuce, mahapech ma'achal. it makes the food, I don't know, come over. Mapech literally means turn upside down, but I guess digest better. And kishut is marchiv me'ayim. Kishut is good to make the bowels go, make your bowels wider so you don't feel constipated. So these are all very good things. So they always had these things. Tosha says they're not exactly very valuable things. It's not like they're fancy. It's that they were constantly available, right? So it's not so much the emphasis on rare things, it's emphasis on having constant availability, like having coffee every day.
Yeah, so in France we have lettuce actually at the end of the meal because it's a digestive.
There you go, just like them. Okay, says the Gemara, but is that really true? Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, Lamani Kra Shma Kishuin. Tana Rabbi Yishmael says, why you call them Kishuin? Kishuin we usually translate, I think, as there's some kind of gourds or pumpkins or I don't know. Why do we call them Kishuin? Mipnei shekashin negufa shel adam ki charevot. They are like swords. They stab you. Well, of course, it depends whether you eat the big ones, which are always bad for you, right? Any vegetable that gets big loses its taste and its meaning, or the tiny ones. They're so much better for you. So the young, immature kishuim are very good. The big ones, I guess, have a lot of I don't know, fiber in them, and they cause you to have cramps and stabbing, and they're uncomfortable. Either way, the point is that Rebbe and Antoninus had very elaborate menus on their tables. Continue the Mishnah now, the third wide line. These are further days of the kings of or the Caesars of Rome that were celebrated and therefore are usher to do business with the Ovdei Kochavim. Yom Haledav, Yom Hamita, right? The day of their birth and day of their death, right? Now, the Mishnah, that was our Mishnah. If you recall, go back to that. That was Rabbi Meir, the Tanakama. Where am I? Yom Haledav, Yom Hamita. And the Chachamim said, no, only Mita Sheish Bas Sreifa. Only if they burn. Remember, sometimes when someone dies, they make a big pyre. So you translate, read it, right? Yeah. And they burn the person and they burn their belongings. They make a big official ceremony. That's where there's Avodah Zarah, and that's where you're worshiping idols, and therefore it's prohibited to do business with them. But regular deaths, not every funeral, even of a Caesar, merits Avodah Zarah. It says Gemara, but that implies Mechlad Rabbi Meir Savar, Rabbi Meir the Tanakama holds, whether the death is commemorated with burning or the death is not commemorated with burning, you see that they will bow down to the Avodah Zarah no matter what, meaning that it's not the burning that's connected to that, it's the death and the funeral and the eulogy where they worship idols, but sometimes they burn things, sometimes they don't. Alma, what you see from here is that Sreifa lav chukai. That Sreifa is not the essential act of Avodah Zarah, because it will be Avodah Zarah even without the Sreifa. The Sreifa is like an extra eulogy kind of thing, but it's not that the burning is the act of worshiping the idol, because it would be worship even without the burn. But Michlal, that implies the Rabbanan Savri, Sreifa Chukai. The Rabbanan disagree, and they say that there's only worship of Avodah Zarah if you're burning things, and we're implying, we understand we're going to come off this in a minute, but the implication is that the burning is the worship of Avodah Zarah, meaning when you celebrate or mourn a great person in their culture and you burn things, that act of burning makes it an act of Avodah Zarah, which would imply that any act of burning a dead body or with a dead body is Avodah Zarah. The problem is that we have this throughout the Tanakh. Hatanya, right? We've got Braita, which describes and says, Sarfin al HaMelachim, you can burn the belongings of a king who dies in mourning, v'lo midarkei ha'mori. It's not considered to be a foreign practice. V'chukahi, if it's the chok of Avodah Zarah, anan hechi sarfinan. How could we do it? Hachtiv b'chukotehem lo telecho. It says you can't follow their laws. Now, this gets to a very complicated discussion. Tosfos here goes through this to some extent of what that really means. Because let's say it was a practice that we had and then the Goyim adopted, right? The Jews burned when the king died, they burned the belongings of the king. They burned his train and his house and whatever. And then the Goyim adopted for Avodah Zarah. When does that become prohibited? Which, of course, becomes a huge issue about many practices, right? There are many things we might have done that have become adopted, let's say, for idol worship, different tattoos or colors or banners or whatever it might be. When does a chukah become a problem? So Tosfos discusses this in some length here. But that's the question of the Gemara, which is, if you're implying the Chachamim say that burning the belongings of a dead king is worshiping idols, how could we do that for a Jewish king, right? Even though obviously we're not worshiping the idols when we do it for a Jewish king, but we're following the same practices that the idol worshippers do. And you're not allowed to follow their practices. B'chukotehem lo telecho. Ella, says the Gemara, you're right. Tikuli alma sreifa lo chukahi. it's not the burning that is the worship of the idols and the burning that is the act of Avodah Zarah. Ela chashivutahi. It's saying, sometimes when someone dies, we're very sad, and sometimes we're a little bit sad. Some kings are more beloved than others. Some leaders are more beloved. If we go to the trouble to burn their stuff, it means that they were very beloved, and we also worship their idols. So it's not that the burning is the worship; it's that it's a mark that this is a really important funeral, and we're going to worship, and we're going to do Avodah Zarah. This is what the Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are arguing about. Rabbi Meir Savar, and Meir says, Lo shlamita sheish basreifa, lo shlamita shein basreifa, pachil avodat kochavim. That whether they go this extra step and they burn the belongings at the funeral or they don't, they still always give gratitude and worship to their gods. And so every death and funeral of a king is associated with Avodah Zarah, and therefore you can't do business in those days. And Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold that mita sheyesh basreifa chashiva lahu upochula. If there's a burial that's so grand that they're going to do the 21-gun salute or this equivalent, which is burning the belongings of the king, then that's a very high occasion, and they'll do worship of Avodah Zarah, and therefore you can't do business with them. But she'ein basreifa lo chashiva v'lo pochulu. If there's no burning, it means that this is a minor funeral, and therefore there is no Avodah Zarah worship at that funeral, and you can do business with the Goyim on those days. Now, Gufa, says Gemara, let's just get, those who want to remember Tanakh a little bit, think a little bit more about this question of burning things along with the king who dies, right? Says the Braita, 8 lines from the bottom, Sarfim al HaMelachim, you can burn the belongings of a king who dies in their commemoration at their funeral. Ve'ein bo mishum darkei ha'amori. That does not count as doing actions that are foreign to the Jews, not necessarily Avodah Zarah, but darkei ha'amori, which we prohibit, which means, non-Jewish practices, right? Shenemar, and how do we know that? Because based on the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, right? Yirmiyahu gives a nevuah to Chizkiyahu, I think, right? I don't remember who he gives to. Yirmiyahu gives a nevuah to, who was the last king? I think it was Chizkiyahu, yeah. Not Chizkiyahu. What's his name? Sorry, it'll come to me. So Yirmiyahu gives a nevuah to the king. Tzidkiyahu, thank you. I got confused. The Chizkiyahu, and I couldn't get it off it. But yes, thank you. Tzidkiyahu makes some sense, right? The last king of the Bayit. So Yirmiyahu gave a nevuah to him that said, "B'shalom tamut," that although you're going to go into exile, which he did, Nebuchadnezzar took him and he went to Bavel, you will basically die in peace, meaning you won't be murdered or killed or executed. You will die in peace. U'b'misrafot avotecha amlachim asher hayu lefanecha. I don't have the psukim here, but there we go. Nava's got them. Like the burial pyres of the kings who were before you, you also will be burned, which is a good thing in this case. And they will give you a good hesped, right? So you'll be, unlike many kings of Yisrael, especially, who did not merit burial or hespedim, or the whole family of Yeravam, right? If you recall, you will at least get that kavod. You, of course, were deposed as being king, but you'll get that kavod. So that's what Yirmiyahu said to Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu. So it says the Gemara now, where am I? So you see from there that clearly they were burning the possessions of the kings, right? It's clear from the psukim. And continues the Braita, Kashem shesarfim al hamalachim, just like we did this for the kings, that when a king died, we would burn their possessions with them, or with their funeral procedure. Kach sarfim al hanisiim. So too, you can burn things when a nasi dies. It doesn't have to be a king. It could be any beloved leader. Umahin sarfim. Now, what do you burn? Al hamalachim, mitatan. You burn their bed, right? I guess their personal bed that they laid on, or maybe the thing that they traveled on, thing they sat on. Ukli tashmishan, and their personal things, their own things that it's not covered for anyone else to use. Once a king has used it, it shouldn't go out on eBay and be resold. So they would burn it. There was a story of Rabbi Gamliel Zaken, who of course was not a king, but he was a nasi, right? He died. Unklis Hager burned 70 manatsuri. Manatsuri are very valuable, $70,000 to show the commemoration for his death. Of course, you're going to realize that this, anyways, let's keep going. The Amr, it says, we said Mahin Sorfin, we don't burn money. We said Sorfin Alein Mitatan, Klitash Mishan. What do you mean you burn $70,000? You're supposed to burn their possessions. Amos is, well, you're right. No, they burned his possessions that were worth Shivim Manatsuri, right? They burned his possessions that were very valuable because obviously Rabbi Gamliel was, I must have had a very fancy bed or something. So they burned his stuff, and this was the common practice back in those days. Is that true though, that you only burn his bed and his personal belongings? So midyachrin lo, you don't do other stuff. Tanya, we have a braita which says ogrim ala malachim. That one of the things they used to do is they would take the horses and the animals of a king that were his private horse, and they would be oker. Oker means to make it lame, right? They would separate the hoofs and make it not be able to run again because they didn't want anyone else to get value, like with Achashverosh, remember, right? Mordechai riding on the horse of the king. It was inappropriate. They didn't want anyone else to use the horse of the king. So it would be another sign of basically taking the king's things out of circulation. And you're allowed to do that. So you see that you do it for animals also. Says Rav Papa, the answer that I already gave, that animals, it means personal animals, right? It means his horse, right? It doesn't mean you take general possessions. If the king owned five cows that you hurt them and you kill them because the king died. It means the personal thing that the king used, the chariot, not the chariot, the horse that he rode on, you can make that horse lame because you don't want anyone else to use it after the king. But is it true that it's only a horse? Behemah Torah lo, not his regular animals like his cows and his donkeys and not donkeys, cows and his sheep. But Tanya, the Braita says, Ikur sheyeshba trefa asur shema trefa mutar. That if you talk about ikur, the kind of ikur you're not allowed to do is that which makes it a trefa, meaning you separate critical organs and it's going to die. But you can do an ikur, you can dislocate the foot in a way that doesn't make it a trefa. Now, forget about the halacha, which we'll talk about in Chulin, but why would you're obviously not talking about trefa by a horse. A horse is not trefa. Horse is treif, right? So there's no concept of trefa by a horse. It must be talking about his cow. Why in the world would you be harming the nasi or the king's cows if you only do things he personally benefit? A king does not ride a cow, right? Nobody rides on cows, as you probably know, for more than 8 seconds, right? So how can you explain that? Or at least let's just finish the bright. Sorry. What does it mean in ikur that doesn't make it a trefa? It means that you separate the hoof from the lowest joint and below, meaning the bottom part, which it will obviously make the animal not walk properly, but will not kill it. So you're allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do the other trefa. But how could what's this referring to? If you're talking about behemah Torah. Tirgamar Rav Papa said, Rav Papa, the obvious answer to anyone who is very familiar with cows, like Nava, it's referring to a cow that pulled his wagon. Agalah mushechet bikaron, right? You definitely use cows and pack animals, right, to pull things. And so basically, if the king had a personal chariot or the nasi, and it was pulled by his steady, cows or donkeys or whatever, when the king dies, it is appropriate to take those animals out of circulation, right? Either by killing them, which we don't really want you to do, or by making them lame so that others do not use them. Tosfos actually goes on Amud Aleph also into a lot of discussion because Rashi implies here that you're not allowed to make an animal behemah Torah trefa for no reason, and Tosfos is very bothered by where that comes from. Like where's their prohibition against hunting for fun, let's say, or doing that? And second of all, Tosfos discusses the question about tashchit. Right, you're not really supposed to destroy things. Like, how could you take all this stuff out of how could you just burn all the king's things? That seems very wasteful. Tosfos points out that Baal Tashchin is a relative value. It means you shouldn't waste things, but it's not wasteful if it serves a public function, right? If this is the way that the tzibur mourns the king and it becomes their way of accepting his death and dealing with it, that's not considered to be Baal Tashchin. Right, Baal Tashchit is only if there's no purpose, but here there's clearly a purpose of mourning that you're doing this for. It is very wasteful though. So, anyways, that is a discussion Tosfot has. Continue the Mishnah now at the third line on Daf Yud Aleph and Mebet. The next thing we said was that there's a holiday on Yom Tiglachat Zikano, on the day that the king or the leader shaves their beard. Seems like a very weird holiday, but they had some kind of focuses, and they would go and make a special prayer to God or to their God, to their Avodah Zarah on the Yom Tiglachat Zikano. Says the Gemara, they didn't just grow their beards, if you recall, in Rome. They also grew ponytails, right? So they used to have a custom where you would shave the beard, I guess, and leave the hair on top of the head growing. like the Mongols, I think looked like that, right? At least in the movies. And thank you, Charlie. And then at some point after a year, Rashi says they would shave the head also. So there was like different steps in the process. So ask the Gemara, Boilu, Katani. When we say Yom Taglachat Zikano, does it mean also Hanachat Ploryato, the day that you shave the beard and leave the ponytail? Meaning you do one, not the other. O Dilma, is it the day Yom Taglachat Zikano, V'havarat Ploryato, the day you shave both, which I guess were different days in their ritual ceremonies. Tashmas, who says the Gemara, the Braita says both. The Tanya Tervayo, both of them are holidays for them. Yom Taglachat Zikano, V'hanachat Ploryato, the day that you cut your beard and leave your bloryit, which is the ponytail, we'll say. And Yom Taglachat Zikno V'havarat Ploryato, and the day that you do both, the day that you cut both the beard and the bloryit, they're both considered holidays. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. This is a bizarro Gemara, but it's fun. Od Yom Acheret Yesh Lahem Baromi. They have another holiday. We just mentioned all these Roman holidays, right? There's another holiday in Rome, and I don't know if Seinfeld has any correlation between this holiday and reality, but the Gemara has this holiday of a holiday they did in Rome, Echad Shivim Shana, once every 70 years. So they would have this once, I don't know if there's a word for once every 70 years, but once in a lifetime, we'll call it, right? Because that's the 70 years is a lifetime. They would have a ceremony in Rome. And as we're going to see in a minute, the whole point of the ceremony was to show that we descendants of Esav, remain ascendant over Yaakov, over the Jews, the descendants of Yaakov. So they had a highly symbolic and ceremonial procession that told this message. What did they do? They came every 70 years. Now, 70 years, couple is a lifetime, so you do it once a lifetime. 70 years, of course, was the Zman of the Churban, of the Bayit Rishon, according to the tradition, right? And so maybe after 70 years, you would think the Jews would come back. So every 70 years, you basically show we're still winning, which is basically what they were saying. So they would bring together this thing every 70 years. Mivi'in Adam Shalim, they would bring a healthy, strong person who symbolizes Esav. Umarkivinoto Adam Chiger. They would have him ride on a lame person who symbolizes Yaakov, who was made lame by the Malach, right? Umalbishinoto Bigdei Adam Harishon. They would have, and again, I don't know exactly what this is. They had the clothing of Adam Harishon. Remember the famous kotanot or that were made, the clothes of light that God made for Adam, which your tradition says Esav found and Esav took from Nimrod, right? There's all kinds of midrashim about these clothing, very Kabbalistic midrashim. They would have these in Rome, and they would put these ancient clothing on the healthy person to symbolize that he is man, he is Adam. Now they would put on his head kifalosh Rabbi Yishmael, the face of Rabbi Yishmael. Remember, we read the terrible story in Asara Rugei Malchut on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, that the daughter of the Caesar saw Rabbi Yishmael. He was so beautiful, she didn't want him to kill him. When he was killing him, they killed him and they preserved his face because it was so beautiful. So they had this in a museum, and they would put it on this person once every 70 years. The Talale Bitsavre Mitkal Zuze de Pisa, they would put on his neck a mitkal, like a weight or a value, a coin of a zuzah de Pisa. Some have 200 or other, but anyways, a very valuable coin. Umechafin et hashvakim beinach. They would cover the what do you call it? The shukim, the markets with like decorations. Umachrizin lefanav, and they would announce in front of this procession, Sach Kiri Plastar. This is Sach Kiri Plastar means the messenger. Kiri Rashi understands that the cheshbon, Sach means the count of the Kiri. Kiri is the Kitzin. Rashi says the general, the one in charge, is Plastar, is false, right? Meaning the Jewish promise is gone. Rashi understands Plastar is Yaakov. Tosfos says it's Yitzchak. But basically, the message was the Jews' calculation. There's 70 years that they think they're going to come back to power after 70 years is clearly wrong. They're never coming back to power. And Achva Dimarana Zaifana, the brother of our master, is a liar, right? Meaning, who's the brother of their master? Their master is Esav. The brother of their master is Yaakov. So Yaakov is Zayaf, is a phony, right? Meaning his promises were all to naught. And Dechami Chami, someone who comes and sees this procession now will see it. But if you don't see it now, you're never going to see it, right? This is your once in a lifetime chance. The lo chami, If you don't see this now, you're never going to see this again. And my ahani the Ramah b'Ramuta. What did it help the Ramah? Remember, that's how they refer to Yaakov, who tricked his father to get the brachot. What did he gain by tricking? Look, he's on the bottom now. We Romans are on top. So he's gained nothing from his lies. Zaifana b'Zefainuta. And the cheater has gained nothing by cheating. Umisaimin bahachi, and they would announce at the end of the ceremony, Vai ledain kad yakum dain. Woe to this one, meaning woe to Rome, if the Jews ever become powerful again. So, and that's of course what Yitzchak said, La'om mila'om yamatz, right? That one will be powerful at a time. So basically, they had this great ceremony where they basically celebrated their ultimate victory over Yaakov, or their continued ultimate victory over Yaakov. So now, before we ask the question, of course,
Steinsaltz says that these were the Ludi Saculares, and there's even a Wikipedia page about them. And they were held kind of irregularly, but maybe average every 70 years. And they also involved a lot of pagan worship as well.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So that's our Gemara's questions, right? Why didn't you list this holiday? Clearly, if there's a lot of worship going on, Avodah Zarah, shouldn't do business around these holidays. Now, before we answer the question, says Rav Ashi an interesting point. Says Rav Ashi, Hichshilan pian l'rishayim. Their own mouths have tripped them up, these wicked people. Because if they had said, Zaifana achvan demarana, the brother of our master is a liar, that would have meant what they're trying to tell. They're trying to say that Yaakov is a liar, right? That could Amri. But what they said, Hashad Amri Dimarana Zaifana, right? They said Achva Dimarana Zaifana. The brother of they think it means the brother of our master, Yaakov, the brother of Esav, is a liar. What it really means is the brother of our lying master, right? Brother Achva, the brother of Marana Zaifana, of our master who's a liar, which is Esav. So because they said it the wrong way, they basically tripped themselves up. That means Marana Gufe Zaifano. Anyways, ask the Gemara now. Tana dida my time lahai, right? I'm sorry, chashav. Why did our Tana not include this holiday? I don't know what its name is. Says the Gemara because lahai diita b'chol shata v'shata k'chashav. The things that were happening annually that were regular holidays are Tana mentioned. The leta b'chol shata v'shata, things like this, which were very rare or irregular, as Charlie said, lo k'chashav. We didn't mention every single holiday. There were probably hundreds of occasional holidays that would be prohibited, but we don't mention all of them because they're not regular. Okay, says the Gemara now around halfway down, Hani Duromai. These were the Roman holidays, our Mishnah said. What about the Parsai Mai? What are the Persian holidays, right? Of course, after the Mishnah, which was in the Roman times, they went to Bavel, right? And they had a lot of Persian holidays. We're not Babylonian, Persian though, holidays. So those were called Mutradi and Turiski and Muhuranki and Muhurin, okay? And I will let you do your homework and discover what all of these Persian holidays are. But these were all different Persian holidays. They probably all had to do with fire, would be my guess. And those were Hani de Porsai, right? Those are the holidays of the Persians and the Romai. What about the Bavlai? What about the Babylonian holidays, Mai? So those are Muhuranki, Vachnita, Bichenvani, and Esser Ba'adar. They had a celebration on the 10th of Adar. Rashi says, of course, they weren't celebrating the 10th of Adar, but whatever holiday they had came out on the 10th of Adar. So they had some celebration on that day. Anyways, these are just the list. It doesn't mean that much to us, of course, nowadays. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda, our Gemara might say, what are the American holidays, right? We could keep going. But says Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav, Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, Amar Rav, Chamisha batei avodat kochavim kvuin hein. There are 5 temples of Avodah Zarah that are fixed. We'll see in a little bit. The Gemara asks, what does fixed mean? Gemara is going to explain that fixed means that they worship there all the time, right? As opposed to, there are some places where you all gather at the Hajj once a year, or you go somewhere. It's probably not a good example, but you go somewhere, once in a while, and it's usher on that day. But these are 5 temples of worship that are year round. So what are they? Elohein, Beit Baal beBavel, the Beit Baal in Bavel, Beit Nevo Kursi, sorry, the Beit Nevo in Kursi, Tarata Shebemapag. Again, I don't really know what most of these places are. Srifa Sheba Ashkelon, Srifa in Ashkelon, and Nashra Sheba Arvia. Sounds like Arabia, right? Nashra in Arabia. So anyways, these were all different places in Bavel and in Ashkelon, which presumably was the sea people, right? The Plishtim and people like that. Anyways, these are 5 huge temples that are in operation all year round. Yat Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, Hosifa Aleim, he added a couple. Yerid Shebein Bechi, the place called Yerid in Ein Bechi, and Nidbika Sheba'ako, another one in Akko called Nidbika. Okay, and Ikid some had the opposite girsa. It's Nitzbira Sheba'ako. And Rav Dimi, so it's not called Nitbika, it's called Nitzbira. Rav Dimi and Ardai Mati Yipcha, Rav Dimi said the opposite, Yerid Sheba'ako, Nidbika Shebein Bechi. Either way, these are all these things. And Amar Le Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda, the last line of last narrow line, the first wide line now. What is my kivuin hein? What do you mean there are 5 places that are, or 7 places that are kivuin? Amar Le, so he said to him, this was Rav Chisda said back to Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda, right? Rav Chanan, the son of Rav Chisda, right? He said to him, Hachi Amar Avua Di'imech. You know, your grandfather, not me, he was his father. Your mother's father, your grandfather, Rashi say who that is? Maybe it was Rav, right? I don't remember who it was actually. Your father's mother said, Kavuin hein la'olam. But kavuin means that they are always there, meaning tadira kula shata pochla. That they are always there, meaning they don't. Some places, of course, you make a temple in one place, and the next year you move it somewhere else. They were nomadic in many of these religions, right? These are fixed temples, which was a rare thing in the ancient world, right? That's one thing. And second of all, they would worship there all year round. So tadira kula shata pochile, they would do it constantly, meaning all year round. They would bow down to them, and therefore, presumably, if you were in that place, you couldn't do business with the people all year round, right? Again, if they're, because they would be taking the things to worship and praise their idol. Now, this is where we, of course, raise Shmuel's point again, which we had earlier, we quoted earlier. Amar Shmuel said, you know, we're not so strict about all of this in our towns. Bigoleh, which is a pretty big area, the Galut, which is Bavel, right? Eino asur ela yom idam bilvad. We only prohibit Yom Idam. So although our Mishnah said 3 days before and 3 days after, remember, in the Goleh, we only do Yom Idam. We only do the day of the holiday. The Yom Idam Nami, and ask the Gemara, is it even that day? Do we even prohibit the day of the Eid? Mi Asur, Varav Yehuda in Bavel. Sharle the Rav Bruna, the Zvuni Chamra, Rav Yehuda, allowed Rav Bruna, the Rif apparently has a girsa of Rav Nachman, to sell wine, and the Rav Gidol, the Zvuni Chitin, and he allowed Rav Gidol to sell grain, b'chagata de Taya, on the holidays of the Taya. Taya usually translates Arabs, right? The holidays of the Arabs. So you see that he let them sell it even on the holiday. Says the Gemara, well, that's different. Shani chagata de Taya velo kfiyah. That's different. That's because the holidays of the Arabs, or these specific people, are not fixed. And therefore what, right? So it's not really clear. Rashi here seems to say that therefore you can sell basically on a day that was usually a holiday, because they don't always keep their holidays. You know, sometimes they observe it, sometimes they don't observe it. You never really know. And you can assume that they're not actually worshiping it, right? That's what Rashi says here. So that implies that if you knew for sure that they were worshiping it on that day, you couldn't sell it. But as you can imagine, this, and I mentioned this in the beginning, you know, this is where a tremendous amount of discussion comes up with Shmuel's eter in Bavel, why Shmuel was mater in Bavel for people to only keep one day, right? We said earlier some of the reasons were Ava, because afraid of what other people are going to say, or because they needed it for business. But you see here, the last answer, of course, is that because they're not really that religious, meaning we don't really think they are so committed to their gods that they're actually worshiping it all the time, and therefore it may not be such a big problem. Now, we're going to stop there because we're at the Mishnah near the end of the daf. But obviously, this opens a huge can of discussion, can of worms, we'll call it, about how you know what's prohibited and which idol worshipers really worship their idols and which ones don't and which ones believe it. And I will leave that as an open question for us to think about. So, thank you. Miriam, have a safe trip.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, well, okay. Oh, yeah, call me. I'm home. Well, any chance, maybe this evening would be better if you can.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
I'm only really home like after 8 or 9 o'clock most nights. I mean, I'm home, but not till late.
That's fine.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Take care.
Bye.